What do you think when you see a can of canned food? Okay, probably nothing, but I bet you have no idea of the great story behind this small invention, and that the can opener emerged almost 50 years after canned food. But let's get straight to the point. Our story begins in 1795, the year when Napoleon Bonaparte offered a prize of 12,000 francs to the inventor, who could find a cheap and effective method of preserving large quantities of food. It was the time of the French Revolutionary Wars, an era where one of the greatest military advantages an army could have was maintaining a food supply line to ensure that the stomachs of thousands of soldiers didn't go empty on the front lines, and to prevent them from turning against you because they couldn't endure eating dry and smoked food any longer. Something that is still a crucial issue today, so imagine back then when things were transported by cart. Now, add the fact that food in a jar spoils in a few days, and multiply that by the size of your army, and you'll have a sizable problem. Fortunately for Napoleon, the 12,000 franc prize yielded results. Around 1806, a French confectioner named Nicolas Appert presented a method to preserve food in glass jars that made them edible for many months. This method allowed him to win the 12,000 franc prize in 1810 and earn the title of the father of canned food. In fact, his initial process used glass jars with lids instead of cans, but it was a very similar process to what would be used in canned foods. Another detail is that he only won the prize in 1810, because between 1806 and 1810, his process was tested by the French Navy on a wide variety of foods, including meats, vegetables, fruits, eggs, milk, and even prepared dishes. A process that Appert didn't fully understand why it worked, but today we know it was due to the jars being cooked in a water bath. The pressure inside them allowed the temperature to reach values of up to 120 degrees, killing microorganisms and preventing the dreaded botulism. As the jars cooled, a near-vacuum sealing occurred, preventing new microorganisms from entering. Later, this process would be done by boiling the jars in pressure cookers like these. One of the conditions for the Frenchman Appert to win the 12,000 franc prize in 1810 was that he published a book describing the invention, making the idea public domain. This was a normal French condition, as the same thing would happen with the daguerreotype photographic process, for example. This allowed the English inventor Peter Durand to use this knowledge to obtain the world's first patent for a canned food can in 1810, which was made of cast iron and tin. The can solved the problem of transporting fragile glass containers, but created a new problem: how to get the food out of there. The consensus among the military at the time was that hungry soldiers would find a way to get the food out. They did so by throwing stones, using bayonets, or hammers with chisels, but it was evident that this had to be resolved, but we'll come back to that. But before that, let's go back to the Frenchman Appert, who in 1810 took the prize money and used it to expand his small preserved food factory. It was 4 years of prosperity until, in 1814, the factory was set on fire by enemy soldiers who invaded France, and he lost all his investment. In the meantime, the French also experimented with cans to store food. However, the manufacturing process produced 6 cans per hour, making it impractical. Another problem was that the cans were actually metal cylinders, making the task of loading the carts extremely difficult. The transport weight was enormous. Now you can understand why can openers weren't invented immediately. The first cans, as I mentioned, were more like small gas cylinders than the cans we know today. They could be up to 5 millimeters thick, but that would change with the natural evolution of manufacturing and mechanization processes, coupled with the growth of urban populations throughout Europe, which increased the demand for canned foods. Around 1850, cans were already thinner, and machines could produce around 60 cans per hour, allowing inventors like the American Ezra Warner to start thinking about devices to open them more efficiently. Like his 1858 patent, the world's first can opener patent. It was essentially a blade with a lever support that cut the can in an upward pulling motion. The problem was that it left the edge of the can uneven, like when cutting with a knife. Despite this, this opener was widely used in the American Civil War, and innovations in this area continued. In 1866, J. Osterhout patented the can with a key opener that you can find on sardine cans. 4 years later, in 1870, the first rotary can opener was patented by William Lyman. It was a very simple device. First, the tip was pierced in the center of the can, and then a small sharp wheel was pressed and rotated to cut the can lid. As for this can opener with a rolling wheel that cuts the edge of the can, widely used in the United States even today. It was patented by Charles Arthur Bunker in 1926. I know you might be wondering, what about my can opener that I have at home? When was it invented? Well, this is the famous P38 can opener, developed in 1942 for the American military during World War II. According to my research, it was developed in just 30 days by Major Thomas Dennehy, and it was named P38 because it took 38 punctures around the C-ration can to open it, and because it was as fast in its task as the P-38 World War II fighter. In fact, some soldiers called it the best military invention in history because, in addition to opening cans, it was used as a screwdriver, for cleaning equipment, and in countless other tasks. Speaking of war, World War I was responsible for boosting canned food production. They were cheap, high-calorie foods that could be transported safely and survived the harshest conditions that the front lines could offer, such as deserts or snowstorms. And it wouldn't take long for someone to think about putting beer in these cans. The world's first beer can was developed in 1933 and introduced to the American market in 1935. They were made of thick sheets of steel to withstand pressure, and were opened by making a hole in the lid with this opener or with some tool. Nowadays, cans are so common that we forget how important they once were, feeding fighters on the battlefield and adventurers on great expeditions to inhospitable places. By the way, comment below which canned food couldn't be missing on your expedition. And speaking of expeditions, for a long time, the only available foods for sailors were dried and smoked meats, and biscuits made from flour baked until they became as hard as a stone to resist mold, but no fruits and vegetables. It was a diet that deprived them of the important vitamin C, leaving them with the terrible disease of scurvy. A solution to this was to consume oranges, but like all fruits, they didn't last long, making an expedition to the Arctic, for example, almost impossible. Another solution was to consume fermented foods like sauerkraut, made from fermented cabbage, but who can endure eating that for months? It was around 1814 that canned vegetables and meats from an English company called Donkin, Hall & Gamble came to solve this problem once and for all. It was the world's first canned food industry, and arose from the patent of the Englishman Peter Durand, which he sold to the entrepreneurs for $1,000 in 1812. That would be around $70,000 today. Now, European sailors could do without sauerkraut and eat fruits and vegetables while sailing the world. Of course, at this point, there was also the Frenchman Appert's company, but his preserved food was sold in glass jars, and in this year, his factory was on fire due to the invasion of the English and their allies. Now, before I say goodbye, I would like to recommend the videos that appear here. I'm sure you'll like them. Thanks for your company, and until next time.